Hello. Today I'm going to be discussing something a little different from what I normally do. And instead of talking about a series, I'm going to do something that I really should have done a while ago. I'm going to talk about me. And basically, I'm going to be going over why I'm doing what I'm doing, the sort of format of what I plan on doing, maybe some of my future goals. So, let's get on with it. Alright, first off, my name is Paul Westman. I have just recently started doing this, and it's mostly just as a way to talk about books, because that is something that I enjoy doing a lot. Now, alright. I've been reading for most of my life, as far as I can remember. It's always been a very big passion of mine, so one of the issues that I've been having is that while I do read a lot, I don't have a lot of people to talk about books with. So that is what has sort of inspired me to bring my passion for books into a new environment. Now, one of the things that you might ask is like, well, why should anybody listen to what I have to say? And the answer is, well, I don't have a reason. I have no sort of special qualifications. I have no college degrees. I haven't studied the art of literature. And so I'm just a guy that reads books. And if you want to watch these and enjoy those same books that I read, that's great. But this is not some sort of breakdown of like how things are or how to write, what makes good writing. I am not qualified to determine what that is or how to judge that. So that's one reason why I try to stay out of that. Now, most of you, many of these videos also immediately get uploaded to YouTube right away. The reason for that being it allows the videos to last longer, since Twitch only maintains the stream for a limited amount of time before it automatically takes it down, and I'm not willing to put forth the time, money, or effort to keep them up indefinitely, if that's even possible. I just throw them on YouTube, so if there's anything that you missed, you can check it out there. It is YouTube channel under the same name as this channel, the Westman 613. Alright, next up I'm going to talk about a little bit about what it is that I'm actually doing. Like what I call my series setting breakdowns. Like why I'm doing it, the format of what I'm doing, and what I hope to accomplish by doing so. Now, these series setting breakdowns are there because I think that, what I found is that the setting of the book is actually, in some ways, even more important than the plot of the book. Because basically, if something interesting is happening in one area and everything's focused on this one area and all we focus on is this one region, that takes away from the realism of or say takes away from the immersion of the book, because that's not the way life works, and things happen even if you're not present. So the setting is should not just be focused on this one location. There's other things to consider, outside forces. So that leads to a lot more of an interesting book. Some of my favorite series are books that expand the world. Like the world building is sort of a character in and of itself. When the world is active, that makes a far more enjoyable book for my preferences. So that's why I think the setting is far more important than a lot of people really give it credit to. Now, one thing that I will talk about is a lot of times in books and in movies, a lot of the setting is, and there's also a lot of history, which in my opinion is a part of the setting, is sort of kind of set off to the side and really vaguely implied at times. And while I understand why that is done, I don't necessarily agree with it. The best example or a good example that I brought up in my first stream that I did was the Star Wars movies. Now, the first movie that was released is Episode 4, A New Hope. And in that movie, we see like one of the early major scenes is Darth Vader talking to his fleet generals or admirals, and they talk about how the Senate's not going to stand for this sort of action, so Vader can't really do what he wants to do. And then Darth Vader says the Emperor dissolved the Senate, so he can. And this information is kind of just almost a throwaway line in the movie, and when we first see it, all we really understand is, yes, there was a Senate, and now there's no longer a Senate, and we don't understand like the heavy implications of where that leads. It's implied, but it doesn't have the same amount of emotional weight. Another good example is when Luke Skywalker is at Ben Kenobi's house early in the movie, and he mentions that, oh yeah, I fought with your father in the Clone Wars. And everything all we understand is that there was wars in the relatively recent past, and they fought together. That's it. We don't really get sort of any emotional weight to that. And we didn't for decades. It wasn't until all the prequels released that we could really view the original series again in that new light, because we now saw the history. We had an emotional connection to it, and that is what allowed us to have a greater understanding of the movie and of the actual weight of these scenes. Now, what that has allowed us to do is that once we have that better understanding of that history, then it brings greater appreciation for it. And that way, a just throwaway line is not as it's no longer up to the viewer or the reader to kind of accept the implied significance of whatever's going on, and it allows us to actually comprehend the true depth and weight of what we're talking about. So, what I'm trying to do is, in a lot of the series I've read, there are some things that are implied in like the history of what's going on in the greater world, but a lot of it's left up to the readers to kind of piecemeal certain pieces of information together. And while I am capable of doing that, I know that not everyone else is, and sometimes it's better to actually look at the greater scheme and just kind of gather all that information so that way you have an understanding of what's going on and you're not really feeling as lost in the stories. All right, and now we'll move on to the general structure of my breakdowns. First, I give like a general overview of what the series is, like the genres that it covers. I've expanded into some of the subgenres as well, because as I've continued on and just gained a better appreciation for how you can break these stories down, it has allowed me to better refine what I'm doing. All right. Next up, I generally will talk about like once the series, the genres, subgenres. I'll generally give a sort of an overview of how long the series is. Some series are much longer, or they might be a little bit shorter. I'll like to mention whether or not the series is over, although in some cases, like a major arc will be over and it kind of seems like that's the conclusion of a series, but then the author decides, we can just start a next arc right here. So a lot of times I'll try to bring up like what the whole arcs are and leave that to the reader to decide whether they want to continue or whatnot. So, yeah, that's that breakdown. Then we get into like the setting itself. I will give you a reference point for when it takes place. Mostly, I only do sci-fi and fantasy, or some combination of the two, because those are my preferred reading genres. But I'll typically give like if it's an urban fantasy, I'll point out what era it's in, what time period it is in. If it's takes place in modern times, or maybe near future, near past. There's also like with sci-fi, it sometimes they give out rough dates or kind of eras that you can go based off of. And also, sometimes the books just don't take place on Earth exactly, but when that does happen, I like to give people my like a parallel time for when it was, such as with the Arcanist series. With that, it's mostly like pirates, maritime, so that's like early 1600s. So that gives you a frame of reference for what you can expect in the series. All right. And it also sort of combines with the location. Sometimes it takes place in space, and you need a sort of a better topographical reference for where all they're going, or like overview of the general empire that we're discussing. Uh, Other times it'll take place like in a more known area, sometimes like in England or in America. So it's a just a way for you to be able to build the world in your mind as you're reading. Uh, then got to talk about the political factions and the various races. Uh, this is oftentimes where I go into the most in depth, because politics affects everything, and it is the political groups that drive uh, who and what everyone's doing. Oftentimes, because you'll always be dealing with guards, or you'll always be dealing with police or the military, and or oftentimes in urban fantasy, it's about how to avoid the police or avoid the human groups, while also having to deal simultaneously with the supernatural factions that have grown up and sort of exhibit control over the lay of the land. So, next, I also tried to give a more in-depth explanation of the magic systems, if it's a fantasy, or the sort of the key technological advancements, if it's more sci-fi, because I lump them together because, quite honestly, they're the same thing to me. There's the old saying about how magic is simply a technology that we don't understand yet. But I like to go into these because oftentimes the series really does hinge on exactly what that is. For instance, if we talk about the Star Kingdom series that I did, one of the key technologies in there is an implant in the brain that allows people to sort of almost directly communicate to computers and communicate with each other. That is a very key part of the series that is brought up, or that is used throughout the entire series, and without it, the series just does not work. And so the entire plot of the series hinges on some sort of technological development. Another great one is with the Kingdom of, or the Empire of Bones series. It's another great sci-fi series that where the people are discovering a lost technology, and a lot of the entirety of the series hinges upon the research, development, and implementation of this found technology from centuries ago that they had forgotten even existed. So that is why I will bring the technology into it, and also magic systems are a great way to help define the series and give it more color and allow it to be more expansive and more well-rounded, bringing the world alive. All right, next, that's really the structure. The last thing I'd like to do is I like to give kind of a spoiler-free review of the first book of the series, although sometimes I have had some issues because the first book of a series is not necessarily representative of the entirety of the series. A perfect example of that is Starship's Mage series. It starts off as a mage joining a trader ship, and they're going around, but then they get on the wrong side of pirates. They get on the wrong side of the law, so they're kind of turns from a tradership to more of an outlaw, running away from the military and trying to hide and just survive. But late at the end of that series, almost all of that gets resolved, and the series then takes a very distinct shift over to more of a military space opera, where we have the actions of the main character sort of where he becomes more of a general or an admiral leading a fleet rather than just a small ship and their journeys. So that's a great example of where this series shifts. Now that series does shift a few other places as well, so it does. Well, if you're only looking for one very specific genre of sci-fi or fantasy, that's not really a great series for you to read because it covers a lot more. It shifts in a few places. It brings about some mysteries. But then there ends up being a civil war, and then once that's resolved, there ends up being another war, and it becomes far more interesting, but it's not a specified appeal. So what you have to do is you have to actually accept the various different genres instead of trying to hyper focus on just one that you might like. So for that, that series really it sort of hinges upon the main character of Damien Montgomery, but it actually focuses a lot more on like his growth and his overall impact to society, which is pretty good. But all that to say, I prefer doing like non-spoiler reviews because I'm not very good at like critiquing books. I don't like do my reviews or anything saying this is a good book or a bad book based upon like specified things. I either enjoy the book or I didn't really enjoy the book. So that is where that's where kind of like my reviews sort of are limited. It is entirely based upon my perspective on that. But you have your own perspective as well, and it's probably perfectly valid. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how I choose what series I'm going to be reviewing, because a lot might have noticed that a lot of the series I've chosen aren't necessarily like the mainstream big published series. I don't think I'm going to do too many of those that are like the real popular series. If you look over here, you can see just on my bookshelf, I've got the Dresden Files right there. That is one of my favorite series of all times. I love it a lot. But it's a popular series. It doesn't really need someone else to go over it. There's dozens and dozens of reviews of the series online already. And what I've been wanting to do is I've been wanting to focus more on like the indie published or self-published books. I will do some trad published books or trad published series, but that's not where I want my focus to be. Because basically the reason why I want to focus on that is when I started reading, when I started like more heavily reading. I didn't necessarily have a whole lot of money, so what I ended up doing was I found the Kindle Unlimited app. And what that did is that's basically like a library in the palm of your hand. You can just go through and it allowed you to check out books, read them, and then check out more books, all for just a monthly subscription. Honestly, it's probably one of the best value things that I have ever bought. So the thing is, not all the books, like not all the trad published books are really on there. And what is, at least back when I started, which was probably around like 10, 11 years ago, uh, these a lot of the books that I was reading, they were indie published or self published, and they were just like using the Kindle Unlimited system as a way to better market their books. And I read a lot of good series. So that's what really introduced me to the indie publishing and self-published world, and it has allowed me to expand the horizon of what I read, and I greatly enjoyed it, and it just allowed me to just find a lot more books in the series that I really enjoyed, and also introduced me to a few new genres or subgenres of books that have become some of my favorite as well. Now, here. Now, a lot of these books and a lot of these series, I just don't see any sort of reviews for online. I don't see any sort of discussion because a lot of people, they don't really talk about them. A lot of the booktubers or what you see on like TikTok, they don't really talk about these too much, or like the self-publish is still not going to say it's viewed as like less respectable than trad publish, because it is growing in popularity, but there is still a degree of bias against it, and you don't see as many people actually doing reviews focusing on these smaller authors and books, even though smaller is becoming a very relative term. And I know that there's a lot of like self and indie published books that have become a lot bigger than what many trad published books are. So a good example for that is kind of bringing me to the next point. One of the largest indie publish indie publishers, I should say, that I have encountered is LMBPN Publishing. Now, it was founded by an author named Michael Anderle. He sort of started it after his main series, The Cartharian Gambit, became far more popular, and what he was doing was he was like drawing in other authors to write in the world that he made, and he was able to expand that success, and he decided to go even further, and he basically founded his own publishing for basically the smaller self-published, indie published authors, and that is what became the LMBPN Publishing. Now, I am not likely going to be doing a whole lot of reviews about that just yet. I may further down the line, but the reason for that is just to sort of avoid any sort of perceived conflict of interest, because I am actually associated roughly with LMBPN Publishing. They institute sort of proofreading group, and I am a part of that group. I have been for years. If you look on many of the books that they have published, you will see my name under the JIT readers, which stands for Just in Time Readers. Uh, Basically, we go through, do some final proofreading, spell checking, and so I have been avoiding that series, even though I've probably read more of their books than I have other books by now, because they do publishing so often, and I'm still fairly active reading their books. But just to avoid any sort of perceived conflict of interest, I have decided to kind of stay away from those for the time being. That may change in the future, but for now, it is what it is. Alright. Now, normally, what you see me using when I'm doing my reviews is the PowerPoint presentation. Now, the reason I do this is because oftentimes what I've been seeing on BookTube is when they edit their videos, they throw up visuals and or little points that they're making, little edits, and that's useful. That's great, because just staring at a person talking for half an hour to an hour can get somewhat tedious, and people will lose attention. So since I'm doing this live, I can't really make those edits. So what I'm doing instead is I build and develop those PowerPoints to provide some sort of visual illustration of what's going on. One thing I will say, with those PowerPoints, if you actually look, you'll see a lot of pictures in the background. What I've been doing for those is I will go onto like stock image websites, particularly the pexels.com or pixelbay.com. They have a lot of stock images that are free to use, so they're royalty free, and those are the ones I use. I also tend to avoid the AI generated pictures, because I will say that at this point in the whole AI debate, doesn't matter what happens in the future, but for now, I'm not comfortable using those. I will use what other artists have provided and have posted on those stock image websites, so that's what I've been using for the time being. The only non-stock image pictures I use will be when I put the book cover on, and also when the slide I use for my book review is also the book cover of the first book of the series. So that's the image that I use for the PowerPoints. I'm not the best at using PowerPoints, but I think I do fairly well. They're kind of enjoyable to make, so I will be continuing to do that in future videos. Now we'll get into some of the long-term goals of this. Now, one thing I found is that by actually starting to examine these books, I've actually learned quite a bit about how to define or how to like break down books even better. Before, I would just like read purely for enjoyment, but by actually having to look in depth and try to pick out facts and try to organize everything, it actually has allowed me personally to enjoy the books even more, because then I get a steady format and outline of exactly what the series is, where it's going to be going. So that has provided me some more enjoyment, and also allowed me to kind of like open my mind around what exactly the setting of the book is and how certain things can be improved, and just it has greatly increased my enjoyment for that. Now, another thing is that one thing I will be doing is I am an aspiring author. I am currently trying to write a few series of books, and that is a much longer term goal. It won't be this year, might not be next year. It's been a while for me working on it, but this is one of my long-term goals, and I hope to use this platform to kind of help inspire people to read what I eventually write and to explain and provide another point of contact or point of marketing for the future series that I do intend to finish eventually. So, otherwise, this is just more or less me wanting to talk about books. This is me wanting to talk about some of my favorite series, why they're my favorite series, and hopefully intrigue people enough to go out and get these series themselves. Now, admittedly, basically all the series are only you might only find them as ebooks, and you might not be able to actually purchase physical copies. So that is a limitation. But honestly, some of these books are worth it, are worth the small expense. It's a fantastic series that I've been reading, and I highly recommend you go out and read anything you want to read. Reading is fantastic. It has always provided a great way for me to sort of explore new worlds and just to develop my own way of thinking that's sort of introduced by hypotheticals that may never actually exist, and it allows you to develop your own philosophies of sorts. Reading is fantastic for that, so I highly recommend everybody to read. Alright, that's going to be just about it. I'll be getting back to the more standard series setting breakdowns, but this is my long overdue sort of introduction of who I am, why I'm here, and what my plans are. So, I will be back next week.